Hey y'all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today we're going to be talking about gimmicks, about character detail, about how much detail and depth you can put on one character. Now this is a subject very much open to interpretation. There's a couple different ways you could go with it, and it's going to depend a lot on your context. So this might not fit exactly everyone, but I think it'll fit most context pretty well. So let's start with what is a gimmick? Let's start with that. So your gimmick is simply an element of your character, a definitive, defining element of your character. So that's what I'm talking about. How many gimmicks can you have at once? How many really strong defining elements can you have and elaborate on at the same time? So what's going to limit you here is essentially your time and the attention span as well, to some degree. So every character should have at least one defining trait, at least one big descriptive, big level of detail. Whether that's dresses up like a bat or to fight crime, whether those could be separate. You could just dress up like a bat for no reason, or you could fight crime without dressing up like anything. So that's kind of two gimmicks right there. Or whether your gimmick is being a Roman legionary. Or whether it's being a legionary and being Roman. Again, they're not mutually exclusive, especially towards the late Empire. It could. So these things could be, your class, your race, if your system has those. It could be your qualities, feats, that or drawbacks even, that really define your character. Alcoholic. That could really define your character, and that's in a negative way. Your religion can really define you, or for other people, it's not really that important to your character as a whole. In the real world, each person is so complex. You can know someone for years and still learn new things about them, which is great. And the better you know them, the harder it is to put them in a little bubble and define them in one or two sentences. So in the game, when you only have one or two sentences to just define your character, sometimes you have to kind of pare it down. So my argument will be that in general, characters can only support about 3 gimmicks. Somewhere 3 or maybe 6 at the most. Definitive, defining characteristics of them. Any more than that, and they get diluted, and they're too complicated. Too complicated to explore quickly. It's a complicated subject, so there will be some caveats or caveats, however you want to pronounce that. But I'll give a couple of examples. So, Mike Lopez, and he inspired this video too, but we were having a conversation in the car on the way home from a game, and I was talking about the character I just played in a one-shot, and I said, he was this big fat guy, he loved to eat, and he was a scheming traitor. And a noble. So right there, those are his 3 really defining characteristics. He's scheming and oily. He's a noble. He's big and fat and likes to eat. And maybe cowardly. Maybe he even had 4 things there, although he wasn't very cowardly. And I was talking to Mike, and Mike was saying, your character was really interesting. It's really fleshed out, well-rounded. It's cool that you were able to make that up on the fly. But the way he kept talking about, I think it was James's character or Scotty's character, the way he kept talking about Scotty, was Scotty's character, it was kind of creepy. Like, he kept, talking about, like, his body, and, how, like, succulent he looked, and then you'd be, like, eating, and he was all fat and gross, and Mike was like, was your character a cannibal? And I was like, no, Mike, he was gay. He wasn't a cannibal, he was just gay. And Mike's like, oh, that makes so much sense. That would have been really interesting. Why didn't you talk about that? Why didn't you introduce that? And I'm like, well, there wasn't time. They only had time to do like those 3 or 4 gimmicks. If we had 10 sessions, I would have had time to give it like, another 3 or 4 gimmicks, maybe. But right from the first session, you got to get really tight. You got to have your character in a bubble, in a nutshell. This is what he is, who he is. So you have instant recognition. And then, in that second session, you just bring it back, and and until the character is really well established, So if I got those 4 elements, fat guy, noble, coward, and scheming. So we got these 4 elements. So the first session, I tried to hit all of them. But the second session, again, I would stick in those 4, but maybe I'd highlight one. I'd be like, this session, I'm going to be extra cowardly. Or this session, I'm going to be extra hungry. Or this session, I'm going to be extra scheming. Or this session, I'm going to really push the nobility and talk about my family and their lineage. So I got 4 gimmicks. I'm going to use all of them as often as I can, but I might explore, one in particular depth each session for 4 sessions. So my character is really well established. You know this guy. You know who he is. You know how he'll react. You can do impressions of him. But if he had, if he had 8 gimmicks, you would never quite know who he is. You'd never be firmly established. And this can be the problem with the special snowflake syndrome. One of our players, Rick, Big Daddy Rick, made his characters too complicated to easily introduce. I love that he made them complicated, but he often had trouble getting all their points across. They were so deep, you couldn't explore them fully in 1 or 2 sessions. So to the other players, he just looked really inconsistent. Like his last character was a noble, a playwright, a war hero, a priest. He's a giant, so he's 7 feet tall. And he had 1 arm, so he's maimed. He raised another character to this kind of fatherly gimmick. But he murdered his ex-wife, so he's vengeful. And he remarried to a foreigner. He had a lot of things on his plate. And he tried to push them all, but you can't push them all in 1 session. You just can't really do it. The better of role player you are, the more gimmicks you can have, to a degree. Even for myself, though, I try to really, really keep it simple. Because you never know what could distract from your character. The session's not going to be all about you. So try to keep it down to like 2 or 3 things per session, maybe 4. And then save in a reserve. So, with that character I was playing, was a big fat gay noble. If I had those 4 sessions to establish him, then in the 5th session we could start really hinting that he's gay, or maybe he could come out at that point, or they could catch him with a slave boy or whatever he's doing. Slave Boy might be too stereotypical. It would be better to give him an actual love interest who's another man. But that depends on the context. If they're in a city, that would be excellent. If they're on the road or in a caravan, it'd be more difficult. You might have to do like the prostitute or the slave boy gimmick, or a boy in every port, something like that. Ideally, like I said, bring in a romance interest and really hit that with a lot of depth. A revelation, and like, oh, he's not just 3-dimensional; he's 4-dimensional. This character is even better than I thought. And you can keep adding to him, but you've got to bring back the original gimmick too. You can't lose sight of the first parts, the bases of the character. And that's one thing Rick had some trouble with, because he was never firmly established. He was all over the place. He was very nebulous. He was like, "Oh, I'm this," and they're like, "You're that? Really? You didn't act like that before, and you didn't build up to it or foreshadow. And I don't even know what you are really. Like, you keep changing so often. I think you're just making it up." And he wasn't making it up. But the character was too complicated. So if I was coming in with that character, I'd really push, a few aspects, and then leave the rest. I'd push like he's a priest and a playwright, and he's a retired war hero. I'd really push all that, So then when we got revelations like, "Oh, you murdered your ex-wife," I'm like, yeah, she deserved it. And they go, "Oh, he's more vengeful than I thought he was." And I could be like, "Well, that was before I was a priest." And they're like, "Oh, that makes sense." And he's like, "The guilt is what caused me to become a priest." And they're like, oh, it makes sense in context, But if you're just like, "I'm a priest and I murdered my ex-wife," and they're like, "What?" That doesn't make sense. And then if you're unable to elaborate, whether it's just because of time limits, because every game session has time limits, or the spotlight's just not on you often enough, or whatever the limitation is, or if it is because you're just a poor role player, or you're a new role player and you're not quite at that level yet, that's why I often advocate, and I'm advocating in this video, keep it simple. Hit up those 3 or 4 core gimmicks, core areas of description. Really push them. Really establish your character and who he is. And then when they know who he is, when the other players, this is your audience, when they know who he is, start to change him and evolve him from there. So I brought in like a bigoted paladin, and he was so bigoted. He hated other races. And he was an elf, so he hated the rest of the party. So they're all humans. He hated other religions. He didn't even treat women very well. And I really pushed all of this for like 4 sessions until they were like, this fucking guy. And they're like, "Dave, why do you play this guy?" He was funny though. That was his saving grace. He was comedic to a degree. He wasn't a joke, but he kept it light enough that he was tolerable. And then once he was established, we got that big role-playing scene when he was captured and thrown in the slave cart with a woman of another race. And they actually hit it off. Their shared suffering brought them together. And she was from another religion too. She was completely opposite of him. But he actually liked her. He got to know her, understand her point of view. And it made him less bigoted as a character. It was such a good storyline. Everybody was like, "Oh, wow, that was so good." Like, the way that you could see that bigoted character realizing he was wrong and struggling with that fact and finally overcoming it and realizing that his friendship with her is more important than these preconceived notions. Man, what a great storyline. But it only worked because he was so well established as one thing that turning him into something else means something. If you're not established and you change, no one will notice, and it doesn't matter because you're not one thing. So it doesn't matter. But if you're established, then you can grow and change and reveal things. So to me, it's really important. Establish that character. That doesn't have to be him forever, but establish him so they know who he is. And I do the same thing with NPCs. I'll hit up an NPC and I'll establish him as this. And he might have 2 or 3 other layers that they'll slowly learn about if they get to talk to him. Or he'll change through the storyline. We had a couple of NPCs the players captured, and they tortured a couple of them. But imprisonment and torture can change a man, So the characters that the players tortured, the players changed those characters in a greater or lesser way. Even just being imprisoned when you're, a merchant prince of Marienburg, and now you're clasped in irons, and they forced him to row on the galley. He's this big fat merchant, and they forced him to row on the galley. I think that was like in episode 2 of Return of the Rune Fangs. But he's only now, it's like episode 22, and he's only now getting ransomed, and he's finally being released from prison. So he'll be a different person than when he went into prison. And that'll be because of the players, and that's a great story. But it wouldn't be as good if we hadn't really established him in his first appearance as this fat, pompous noble. He thought he could bribe and talk his way out of everything, and then they clasped him in irons and forced him to row and threw him in jail. So now when he comes out, they know who he was, and now they'll see who he is now, and that's the story of his transformation, and it'll be great. And maybe he hasn't changed, we'll have to see, but it works so much better because he's established. So that's kind of my rant, my ramble on gimmicks. Keep it simple, then elaborate from there. Don't start off with something so complex that you won't be able to execute it properly. Keep in mind your time constraints. If it's a one-shot, you only probably have 3 things you can do. If it's a 10-shot, you could do 10 things perhaps with one character. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. How much depth should you put onto a character from day one? How much should you reveal from day one? How important is it to establish who they are before you change that or before you make new revelations? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you've seen it done well, if you've seen it done poorly. But I'm going to be signing out now. Hope everybody has a good day in YouTube land. Cheers.